This is a piece of Osage Orange that I purchased on a recent trip to Yandles. If you've never heard of Yandles or never been there, it's highly worth a visit. I made a video on it a few months ago. I'll put a link to that down in the description so you can have a look. Two things I want to mention before I start the video. One, prior to buying this, I'd never heard of Osage Orange in my life. Didn't even know it existed. Number two, this is not premium stock. So at the end of the Yandles video, I said that what I intend to do with this timber is turn it into saleable products. I want to get my money back. On the Yandles trip, I spent close to 2,000 on quite a lot of different timber types so that I could experiment with them. But this whole experiment is to make money. I want to get my investment back. And I also said I was going to start with some basic products and then get a little more fancy as I go through the process. So with this piece of Osage Orange, I'm going to start really basic. Because I've got Waney edge both sides, I think this is going to lend itself to a few charcuterie boards. Really nice and simple, not going to stress anybody or push anybody to their limits. But the first thing I want to do is to find out how it's going to react to being machined. And one of the reasons I feel the need to proceed so carefully is because of this really severe tear out that's on this bit when they've run it through a planer. That is really, really deep. That could be 1.5, 2 mil deep, which I've obviously got to get rid of. But I'm gonna proceed, as I said, really, really slowly for that reason and because I've never worked with it before. And about there, that's about 650, which would give me 1,300, 1,950. Take me to about there, so that would realise 3 pieces, and then a smaller board at about 540. So I think I could be quids in to get my money back. This whole piece costs £60 less 20%, 48 quid. But a charcuterie board there, put in front the right person, you could be looking at somewhere between 65 to 95 quid. Quite a bit of tear out there. Beautiful grain though. So very fine passes to start with, and then we'll have a look after each pass to see whether we're getting tear out or whether it's coming out clean. As you can see, with light passes and planing with the grain as much as you can on a piece like this, you can all but get rid of all of the tear out. There's a little bit left up here, which going through the drum sander should get rid of. So I'll get the rest cleaned up and we'll take it to the drum sander. So the piece on the right is fresh out the drum sander. Piece on the left has only been planed, and it's still very vibrant colour. And it's come up really rather well. Didn't take too long either, about 10-15 minutes I think. So quite happy so far. But what I want to do now is leave that piece stood up in the workshop overnight and see what it looks like tomorrow. I'm a bit worried about these splits and some of the checks in the end. Let's see what happens overnight. Well, my little overnight test has become a little over a week test, which may be not ideal in some cases, but in this, there seems to be no effect whatsoever. I can't detect anything splitting, drying, or warping more. So, a really stable piece of wood, even with the checks and inclusions that it's got. So next step is to give it a sand with 80 grit and 120 grit, and then we'll look at the edges, the bark removal, and shaping the ends and some kind of handle. I've got all 4 pieces sanded now, and they've really come up quite well. Let's take a look at this piece, the smaller piece, because I'm going to use this as the test piece. So I've got 2 things that I need to do now. Number 1, the next job is to sand this live edge and see how well this comes up. So we're going to do that with the Rotec 90, small 90mm fixed drive sander, which should take this down pretty darn quick. And then we're going to look at what we're going to do with these inclusions and splits and nasty little bits. I've got a piece of 80 grit on the sander to start, which should allow me to get through all of the bad material, the real rough material, and get my shape in place really quick. Then I can change to a 120 grit, maybe a 180 grit if I need to get it nice and smooth. This side's come up really well, really quite quick. That only took 5, maybe 6 minutes. This other side is going to take a bit more work because there's a bit more bark on it, and it's really angling the wrong way. I'd kind of like it to splay out from the top. So I'm going to take a slightly different approach with this. As I'm sure you've seen in the past, I could attack that with a chisel, or I could reach for this Arbortech turbo plane. Now, if you've ever used one of these before, you know exactly what I'm going to say, but if you haven't, this is an incredible bit of kit. It will absolutely eat through timber incredibly quickly, but it will also snatch. So if you're going to try one of these, make sure you've got the handle on your grinder or on the Arbortech grinder that you can buy direct from them, and keep a real firm hold. The white knuckle grip of death would be definitely recommended, and go very, very lightly to begin with. And make sure you wear a mask, because this is going to fling crap everywhere. That was less than a minute, and it's dealt with. Superb bit of kit. Back to the sander. Well, that's my two edges, nicely formed. Quite pleasant. They need a bit of fine sanding just to smooth them out. And I'm not worried about the ends yet. We'll get to them in a tick. The next thing I want to deal with are these splits. In particular, this one. So the first thing I'm going to try on this one is some thin cyano. See if I can get it to go down into that crack. Because the thin wicks in really well. Bit of tissue ready in case I get any run over. And we'll let this sink in for a bit. Starbucks are really very good at donating these little stirring sticks to help with spreading. Thank you, Starbucks. I don't think I should have said that, should I? I'm going to give that half an hour to penetrate, and then I'll come back and give it a little spray with some activator just to make sure it's gone off before I give it a sand in, probably with 120 now. And then I'm going to use medium brown, medium viscosity brown Starbond cyano. I like the brown. I can't seem to find it in any other make but Starbond, which is really difficult to get in the UK for a reasonable price. So I'll take this approach with all of these splits and cracks that I'll find on the sides of all the other pieces. So that's the sides taken care of. Now I need to look at these much deeper voids that I've got here. I've scraped out an awful lot. There's a wee bit more in there to come out. So I've got very old pin vise here that I'm using, but you could use an old drill bit or a nail, just to make sure you've got rid of all of the loose debris. And also with these smaller ones, you really want to open it up a wee bit so you give whatever solution you've chosen a chance to get in there. So to fill this void, I'm going to use this knot-tack system of what's essentially coloured hot glue, according to me. You've got a little bit of time to wait for the gun to warm up, not very much, took about 5 minutes. Once it's hot, squid your void full of the appropriate colour, and for this I'm going with a dark brown because the edges are starting to, the edges of the void are starting to discolour, and I think it'll naturally transition to the darker brown. I think it'll look like a natural transition. And then in the kit, sorry I didn't explain the cooling block and flattening block, that's essentially what it is. You press that down on top, forces it all in nice and tight, and also helps it cool. And then you take this chisel plane that again is included in the kit, and clean off the excess. Take as much as you can off with that, and then the rest we'll sand off with the sander, and you're left with almost an instant fill. So that's all my void splits and cracks dealt with. The next thing I need to do is to sort out a handle. Now, initially what I had in mind was like a single-handed handle that I've made before on a serving board, but this time I kind of crooked, offset, kind of gnarly sort of handle that would match the wainy edge of the boards. But that will definitely give the impression that it's a single-handed serving board, and it's not. This one you could kind of get away with, but these three weigh an absolute ton. I can't even pick that up with one hand. So that's definitely not a serving board. Try to carry your salami and cauliflower to the table on that one, it's going all over the floor. So this is going to need a handle at both ends, and it's not that bad that way. So what I've got in mind, it's under here, is a little template for the router. I'm hoping I can get away with one size fits all. This is slightly oversized, and I can put a guide bush in the router so I can follow that outside curve to deal with the square cut of the outside to make that a bit more pleasing to the eye, and then this little handle affair on the inside. So baseboard for the protection of the workbench so I don't gouge it up anymore. Charcuterie board template just back from the edge. I've got a centre line on it so I can sort of eye it up and decide exactly where I want it to be. And then my Craig clamp so it doesn't move, nice and solid. And then in my router I've got the tiniest little guide plate that I can find, 6mm spiral bit, and I'd really love to be able to cut that all out in one hit, but the bit's just not long enough, and my 1/2" bits are up on site at the job I've been doing. Put a link to that video down below, a part 2 coming shortly. So a quick trip over to the bandsaw to cut off the excess, all because I didn't think ahead far enough and pick up a larger router bit from site. And now with the template guided bit, I can remove this last bit on the edge and the last bit in the handle. And then finally, a little 3mm round over. So I've got everything sanded, smoothed, filled, and I think checked and double checked. So now it's time for a finish. And this is a solution that I make up myself, which is 50% pure mineral oil mixed with 50% pure beeswax. Not, I repeat, not paraffin wax. That would not be good. And look at that, that is doing everything I'd hoped for. You see the colour come through. I think these are definitely going to be a bit of a Marmite board. People are either going to fall in love with them straight off the bat because of an intense love of yellow, I would have thought, or they're going to hate them. I think that is stunning. Beautiful colours. And here they are, 4 arguably unique, very vibrantly coloured charcuterie boards. Now, as I said at the beginning of the video, I've never worked with this wood before. I'm working with it, presented a few challenges. Again, as I said at the beginning of the video, this wasn't prime stock. So this piece of timber came with an awful lot of splits, cracks, checks, inclusions, voids. So there was a lot of fill-in work to do. Working with the wood is extremely hard. It ranks 11,640 newtons on the Janka scale, which brings it in harder than white oak, would you believe? Yet it gave the impression of sanding really, really easily. I think in part that's due to, or in the main, that's due to the fact that the dust that comes off is bright yellow, almost a luminous yellow. And if you look around behind me, you can see where the yellow dust has settled to, and I'm going to have a major tidy up now after working with this. And one thing you need to be careful of is that the dye that occurs naturally in the wood, the yellow, is water soluble and is used in some countries as a yellow dye for clothes and the such like. So it needs a really good sealant finish on it. One of the reasons I chose the wax. The timber will over time turn from the bright yellow to a mild brown, a light tawny brown colour. Apparently that happens because of ultraviolet in the light spectrum. The finish will obviously help delay that to some extent. The timber is also known as one of the most decay resistant in North America, and has also been used in the past for bow making because it's got relatively high elasticity. And one other kind of disappointing fact, I suppose, in the main it's harvested because it burns hotter than any other domestic wood. What a shame to cut down something this beautiful and to use it for firewood. I think it's absolutely gorgeous, and I'm definitely going to use one of the planks I bought for highlight strips in probably edge grain boards, I would have thought, maybe end grain, who knows. So that's the first batch of products from the batch of timber that came from Yandles. And I said I was going to start really, really basic. You can't get an awful lot more basic, unchallenging than a charcuterie board, as demonstrated through the video. In the next video, we'll step it up a gear. Not a huge gear, just a little bit. And we're going to encompass a couple more species just to liven it up a little bit. So I hope you'll join me for that, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks very much indeed for watching, and see you next time. Ta-ra!